June 6, 1944, Normandy Beach, France, 9:26 hours. The sand burned like iron under the soles of soaked boots. Smoke coiled low along the waterline, folding into itself like black linen ripped in a gale. Screams rode the surf in waves. Metal pinged, hissed, shattered, clanged. Machine gun nests swept the beach with strings of death. And amid it all, somewhere behind the half-demolished hedgehogs and crumpled tank traps, Private First Class Eli Garvey was yanking furiously on a dented ammo drum wedged against a jammed M1919. "Got him at move," he barked, knuckles scraped raw, helmet askew. The belt-fed machine gun had choked again, third time in 10 minutes. Eli slammed the charging handle back. Nothing. Another jam. Another few seconds for the crowd on the bluff to dial in a bead on their position. Next to him, Sergeant Morano was pinned behind a shattered section of Higgins' boat, bleeding from the ear, half-conscious. Eli's breath came fast. He could hear it echoing inside his helmet like a muffled drum roll. Every few seconds, the entire beach shuddered under the thunder of naval guns from the USS Nevada offshore, firing blind up the hill, trying to punch holes in the concrete nests. But it wasn't enough. Then it happened. A metallic chunk, a hiss of release, and suddenly the ammo drum snapped loose in Eli's hands. Except it wasn't the Army-issued drum. It was his. The stupid one, the one they laughed at. The Frankenstein drum, cobbled together from spare tank sprockets, fuel crate rivets, and aircraft bearings. A 65-pound monstrosity of rolled steel and hand-cut brass gearing. It didn't look like much, rough, uneven weld lines, a ratchet system scavenged from a wrecked B-24's ball turret, but it was his invention, his gamble, his obsession. The thing he dragged through North Africa and Sicily and now into hell itself, swearing one day it'd work. And it had just unclogged itself. On instinct, he locked it back into the side of the M1919, slammed the top cover down, yanked the charging handle, and squeezed. The sound wasn't the usual chatter. It was a roar. A thunderous, continuous belt of .3006 fury pouring out like a damn hosepipe. No stoppage, no hiccup, just 2,000 rounds fed seamlessly in a tightening cone of fire up the slope, sweeping the MG nest like a scythe through wheat. Germans scrambled. One dove, another tumbled backward from the impact. Men around Eli looked up in disbelief. Someone shouted, "Holy hell, what the—" But Eli didn't hear. He was focused, locked in. The gun was singing, and for once it was his tune. Behind him, another squad sprinted past the dune line. A flamethrower unit moved up. The pressure broke. The beach sector they were pinned in, code-named Dog Red, began to push forward for the first time in 20 minutes. Eli didn't stop firing until the barrel turned orange. When he finally released the trigger, his shoulders ached, his arms were trembling, and his ammo drum was glowing faintly at the seams. The sides had held. The gears hadn't seized. It had fed the gun every round it was asked for and begged for more. A corporal ducked beside him, wide-eyed. "What the hell is that thing?" he asked, pointing. Eli just stared at it. He hadn't named it, never thought it'd actually work. And now he wasn't even sure what he'd done. But the story of how it came to be, that started long before Normandy. Before the drum. Before the war. It started with a mistake. A jammed weapon, a lost friend, and a promise whispered under desert stars. 2 years earlier, Tunisia, February 1943. The wreckage of a burned-out half-track hissed in the night, the air still thick with the stench of cordite and diesel. A dozen American soldiers sat quietly around scattered crates, licking wounds and watching the perimeter. The fighting had been fierce, and 3rd Platoon had taken losses. Bad ones. Private Eli Garvey sat alone, cleaning his machine gun in the glow of a Coleman lantern. He disassembled the entire feed system, setting every part out on a folded canvas tarp, rechecking tolerances he already knew by heart. The M1919 had jammed that afternoon at Kasserine Pass. Again, just like it had in Morocco. And this time, it had gotten Manny killed. He still saw Manny's face, twisted in shock as the German rifle cracked from across the ridge, saw his body drop beside the tripod. Eli had tried to fire. The weapon had clicked, nothing more. A dry click. That sound had buried itself in his mind like shrapnel. He couldn't sleep, so he tinkered. He stared at the standard issue belt, the flimsy cloth link, the inconsistent tension, and hated it. He traced the feed pawls with a file. He recalculated friction points in his head. Something was wrong with the way it all came together. The issue wasn't just dirt or heat. It was the entire concept. "You're gonna polish it to death, Garvey," Sergeant Ballard muttered nearby, lighting a cigarette. "I'm gonna fix it," Eli mumbled, not looking up. Ballard scoffed. "You think you're smarter than Browning now." "I think maybe he didn't have to feed it 2,000 rounds while someone shoots at him." Ballard didn't answer, he just blew smoke. Eli had been a machinist before the war. Grew up rebuilding tractor engines on his uncle's farm. He didn't have a college degree, didn't know the textbook equations, but he understood load paths. He understood pressure. He understood what it felt like when a bearing seized up because some fool installed it backward. The Army had given him a weapon that jammed when it mattered most. So Eli decided to build something that wouldn't. The first version of the drum was made in secret, parts scrounged from a wrecked Stuart light tank and an abandoned motor pool outside Esbatla. A busted winch gave him a coiled spring. He fashioned a hand-cranked gearbox from a water pump shaft. Everyone laughed when they saw it. "Garvey's building a music box," they joked. "Looks like a trash can got in a fight with a lawnmower." The drum jammed on the first test, exploded in his lap on the second, but each time he learned, refined, re-welded, rebalanced. By Sicily, it could feed 500 rounds. By Salerno, 800. No jams. Still, the higher-ups refused to approve it. "Unnecessary," the quartermaster had said. "Pointless weight, unvetted design." Eli carried it anyway. In his pack. On his back. Dragged it through mud and over rocks and up cliffs, swearing one day he'd get to prove them all wrong. That day had come on a beach in France. And now word of it was spreading. Not just among the grunts, but up the chain. Someone in ordnance had taken notice. And Eli Garvey, private first class, serial number 32,851,409, was about to find himself face to face with an officer who had no interest in battlefield miracles, and every reason to shut Eli's drum down for good. June 10, 1944, somewhere west of Isigny-sur-Mer, France. The sky was dull pewter. Rain hung in the air but hadn't yet committed. Trucks rattled past deep tire grooves carved in French farmland, engines growling, carrying crates of ammunition and men too tired to talk. Somewhere in the distance, the echo of artillery kept time like a slow, thudding metronome. Eli Garvey sat on a stack of ration crates outside a makeshift tent, watching two men in pressed khakis argue over a clipboard. One of them wore an Ordnance Corps patch. The other, a captain with a silver bar on each collar, kept glancing at Eli like he was a broken carburetor that might explode at any second. "PFC Garvey," the officer finally said, walking over, boots kicking up mud. "You've created quite a stir." Eli stood and saluted. "At ease," the captain muttered, eyes dropping to the ammo drum resting at Eli's feet like a sleeping animal. "This the device?" Eli nodded. "Yes, sir." "It's unauthorized," the officer said. "Unapproved, unvetted, not field-tested under standard procedures. You modified government property, soldier." Eli didn't blink. "Yes, sir." The officer crouched, ran his hand along the edge of the drum casing. "And yet, I've got 3 separate reports from officers across the sector requesting duplicates of this contraption. He looked up. They say it helped break a machine gun nest on Dog Red. They say it ran through 2,000 rounds without a single stoppage. Eli swallowed. That's true, sir. The officer stood, folded his arms. That shouldn't be possible. Respectfully, sir, it is. The man stared at him a long moment. Then, you're to report to the 23rd Ordnance Maintenance Battalion. They've set up a provisional workshop in Bayou. Your invention is under review. You're under temporary reassignment. Eli frowned. Sir, you've got 3 days to convince the Army your drum isn't a fluke. The officer's mouth tightened. After that, it goes in the scrap pile, and you go back to hauling belt links in a mud pit. He turned and walked away without another word. Eli looked down at the drum. It sat in the mud like it belonged there. But it didn't. It belonged on a firing line. 2 days later, Bayeux, France, inside a converted textile mill. The windows were blown out. A canvas roof had been strung between shattered rafters, casting the entire space in a ghostly, filtered light. Crates of salvaged parts lined the walls, transmissions, axles, aircraft mounts, gear clusters. In the center, a machine gun sat mounted on a tripod, aimed at a stack of sandbags. A small group of men in grease-streaked uniforms circled Eli, watching him work. Where'd you get the gearbox? One asked. Off a Jeep PTO shaft, Eli replied, tightening a bolt. The trick's not the gearing, it's the torque curve. Too much pull on the feed and it'll tear the belt apart. Too little and it skips links. One of the engineers crossed his arms. The standard M1919 design was never meant for a drum this size. Eli looked up. That's why this one's mine. He stepped back, locked the top cover down, reached for a fresh belt preloaded into the drum's inner spool. Ready. A lieutenant in a grease-stained jacket stepped forward. Fire when ready, Private. Eli nodded, took position, hands wrapped around the spade grips. He took a breath. Squeezed. The M1919 barked to life. Ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba. The sound filled the space like a buzzsaw let loose in a mine shaft. Brass casings rattled off the concrete floor like hail. The drum whirred with a mechanical purr, smooth and unbroken, feeding the weapon in perfect rhythm. 250 rounds. Not a single pause. The lieutenant raised his eyebrows. Eli let up on the trigger. Smoke curled from the barrel. You ever tested under sand or mud exposure? One engineer asked. Eli reached down, unplugged the drum, and kicked it over into a bucket of thick, muddy water. Gasps. What the hell are you doing? Eli fished it back out, shook it once, reattached it. Fire again, he said. The lieutenant gestured. Proceed. Eli racked the handle and squeezed. The drum fed like nothing had happened. Gasps turned into silence. Even the skeptical engineer just stared. Jesus, someone whispered. The lieutenant scratched his chin. Get Colonel Willoughby. 2 hours later, 23rd Ordnance HQ, Forward Bayou. Colonel Franklin Willoughby was a former Remington Arms engineer turned Army weapons coordinator. He didn't like field modifications, didn't trust improvisers. His office was littered with rejected prototypes from other brilliant minds who thought the battlefield was a workshop. He stared at the drum, now sitting on his desk like it had personally insulted his family. I've read the field reports, Willoughby said, tone clipped. Your drum fed 2,000 rounds during the Normandy landings. Yes, sir, Eli said, standing at attention. No jams? No, sir. Willoughby flipped a page on the dossier. You also bypassed standard maintenance procedures, modified Army ordnance without authorization, and ignored repeated orders to revert to standard issue feed systems. Yes, sir. Willoughby shut the folder. You're lucky I didn't have you court-martialed. Eli didn't flinch. Respectfully, sir, you're lucky I didn't stop firing at Omaha. Willoughby's eyebrows lifted. Excuse me. Eli's voice was steady. My gun jammed twice. First one, we lost half a squad. Second one, I nearly lost my loader. That drum worked. Not just on paper, not just in a lab, on a beach with bullets in the air and men dying. Silence. Willoughby tapped his pen once on the desk. Then again. Finally he stood, crossed to a side cabinet, pulled out a small wooden box. Opened it. Inside was a partially disassembled MG-42, German, belt-fed, 1,200 rounds per minute. They've been testing captured versions in Aberdeen, Willoughby said, trying to understand why they rarely jam. Eli stepped forward, peering inside. The feed system was shockingly simple, tight tolerances, roller locking, minimal flex in the belt. They don't use cloth belts, Eli muttered. No, steel link. Willoughby shut the case. Your drum might be the bridge we need. Eli blinked, sir. I'm giving you 3 machinists in 2 weeks. If you can replicate this device, cleaner, tighter, field-ready, we'll send it to command. If they approve, it gets prototyped, mass-produced. He leaned forward. But if it fails, even once? Eli nodded. Then I go back to the line. Willoughby smiled faintly. No, then you go to Leavenworth. 3 days later, the workshop echoed with hammer strikes and bench grinders. Eli hadn't slept more than 4 hours total. He hunched over the new casing, hands filthy with grease, eyes bloodshot. The prototype had to be lighter, easier to mount, capable of being field-stripped blindfolded. They'd already nicknamed it Garvey's Coffin because of the shape, long, rectangular, side-loaded. But this one had ball bearings from a wrecked Spitfire, a carbon steel shaft from a captured Panzer III. Even the spring was calibrated from a salvaged torpedo arming coil. It was ugly. It was heavy. But it worked. Better than the original. And word had gotten around. Marines on leave from Saipan had stopped in to ask questions. Paratroopers from the 101st wanted to test it with their Browning automatic rifles. Even a crew from a tank battalion had asked if it could be mounted on a coaxial setup. Eli had gone from being the weird grease monkey who couldn't shut up about feed systems to man whose invention might change the war. He stood beside the test tripod now, hands on the spade grips, prototype drum mounted. Ready, someone called. Eli didn't answer. He just smiled and pulled the trigger. At that moment, far away in Germany, an SS munitions engineer named Rolf Bremer was standing in a command tent outside Caen, reading a captured report on the 29th Infantry Division's breakthrough. He frowned. An American machine gun sustained over 2,000 rounds of continuous fire. His aide nodded. Yes, Herr Bremer, from a position under direct pressure. Bremer narrowed his eyes. That's not possible. It appears it was some kind of new feeding system. Bremer closed the folder. Find me that weapon. He didn't know it yet, but the Allies were just days away from deploying the first prototype Garvey drum in the breakout from St. Lo. And by then, it wouldn't be a joke. It would be the reason a whole German platoon disappeared without ever firing a shot. July 20, 1944, south of St. Lo, Normandy, 4:13 hours. The fields were silent. No artillery, no birdsong, just the whisper of wind across broken hedgerows and the distant thrum of engines massing in the dark. Inside a camouflage tent dug into the rear slope of a cratered farm, Captain Alan Rourke leaned over the map table, one palm pressed flat beside his coffee tin. One fortified intersection here, he murmured, tapping near La Chapelle. Intel says they've got MG-42s, possibly a Pak-40 dug in under the tree line. If we try a frontal push, we're minced meat before breakfast. He turned to the tall, lanky corporal standing quietly near the back. Garvey. Eli stepped forward. He wore no insignia, only a faded shirt stained with oil and cordite, sleeves rolled up, fingers blackened. Slung on his back, like some brutal metallic backpack, was the second prototype of the new feed drum, now slimmed down to 46 pounds and capable of holding 2,200 rounds of linked .3006 ammunition. Yes, sir. Rourke motioned toward the map. You said you could give us suppressive fire, real suppressive fire, not just a burst and pray. You said this thing could drown M. Eli nodded once. Rourke met his eyes. We're moving at 500. You'll be on the point with blue section. If you jam, he glanced toward the door, where a young radio operator sat listening to German chatter on a field set. We don't have a plan B. Eli said nothing. But in his chest he felt it, that quiet, terrible calm, the kind he'd only ever felt once before, the day they buried Manny in Tunisia. Outside, the first cracks of dawn began to bleed through the trees like fire under a door. 5:04 hours, La Chapelle sector, blue section push begins. The moment they stepped out of the hedgerow, the woods lit up with muzzle flash. MG-42s, two of them, swept the road with the buzzsaw whine only those guns could make. Rounds snapped past heads. The column scattered. A lieutenant dove into a ditch, yelling into his handset. Eli didn't dive. He ran forward. Dropped to one knee behind a mossy pile of rubble, tripod slamming into the dirt. The gun was already loaded. He had rehearsed the mount blindfolded in the dark. 30 seconds tops. The drum was already humming. Then it sang. He opened fire straight through the hedgerow, into the tree line. And the noise. The sound didn't pulse like a machine gun. It roared like a sawmill caught in a cyclone. A belt-fed thunderclap that cut through the MG-42 nests with surgical fury. Tracers stitched the tree line, ripping through leaves, bark, flesh. 900 rounds. 1,200 rounds. The gun did not stop, it did not cough, it did not jam. The Germans didn't know what hit them. Some panicked and broke for the rear. One was caught mid-sprint and thrown backward by a full burst. Another tried to reload and was stitched into the tree trunk before he could lock the bolt. The Americans surged. Infantry poured through the shattered gap behind Eli's line of fire. Flamethrowers cleared a pillbox on the left. A bazooka team took out the Pak-40. The intersection was theirs. It had taken 6 minutes. Afterward, a sergeant from another unit walked up, staring at the still-smoking drum. You feed that thing gasoline or blood. Eli grinned, wiping soot from his cheek. Just hate. That night, in a rear command bunker, Colonel Willoughby stood before a wall map now marked with red strings stretching through Normandy. We've logged 3 engagements using the Garvey drum, he told the group of officers seated around him. Total suppression times reduced by 45%. No malfunctions. No feed failures. Maintenance time has dropped significantly. He nodded to a corporal, who rolled a film reel into place. The projector flickered to life. Grainy black and white footage showed Eli's silhouette unloading the drum-fed M1919 into a German position. Dirt exploded. Leaves shredded. German bodies collapsed. One of the officers leaned forward. What are we waiting for? Willoughby didn't smile. He was not a man prone to victory laps. But his voice had a razor edge now. We're not waiting, we're deploying. Across the English Channel, London, July 22. A sealed envelope arrived at the desk of Brigadier General Richard Blake, Logistics and Development. He opened it, read the first paragraph. Paused. then looked up at his aide. How many feed drums can Aberdeen build in a month? 20 if we shift off the Bren gun trials. Blake nodded. Do it quietly and find Garvey. I want him in the States, now. When the blindfold came off, he was inside a facility buzzing with engineers and guarded like a nuclear site. The walls were lined with Garvey drums, his drums, but built in aluminum, nickel-plated, slimmed, serialized. The Army had cloned them, mass-produced them. Dozens, maybe hundreds. He felt dizzy. Reddick stepped beside him. We've improved on your concept. Lighter materials, stronger spindles, field-replaceable rollers. He handed Eli a folder. It read, Model B Garvey Rapid Feed Drum, U.S. Army Ordnance Classification RFD B3. Eli flipped to the second page. Under Inventor, it said, Reddick T.J. His hands tightened around the folder. You son of a... Relax, Reddick said. You're being compensated. Your name S in the fine print back page addendum. Eli's voice was ice. You never built a damn thing. No, Reddick said, but I own the office that does. And just like that, Eli was cut off. The man who dragged a prototype across Tunisia, Sicily, and Normandy was now locked in a fenced compound, reduced to a technical advisor with no rank and no voice. He spent the next week sitting in a fluorescent-lit workshop, watching a parade of officers examine his design. They asked him questions, but never really listened. Until one morning, a woman walked in. Late 20s, auburn hair tucked under a test pilot's cap, a clipboard under one arm, confident, direct. You're Garvey. Who's asking? Lieutenant Ava Ross. I fly test platforms for Aberdeen. They say your drum doesn't jam. I aim to find out. Eli narrowed his eyes. You ever fire 2,000 rounds while being shot at? She smirked. You ever fire from a dive at 200 knots in a glass-nosed bomber? He blinked. Wait, they're mounting it in planes. They're trying. A new fire lit in Eli's chest. This wasn't over. They might have stolen the name, but they hadn't stolen the soul. He walked to the bench, pulled out a folded schematic he'd kept hidden in his pack since Normandy. It was labeled Garvey Drum Mark III Aerial Adaptation. And it wasn't just better. It was insane. August 10, 1944, Experimental Hangar 7, Aberdeen Proving Grounds, Maryland. The wind outside smelled like grease and gunpowder. Inside, the hangar was a deafening blend of hammering, welding arcs, and shouted orders. Men in olive drab moved crates of ammunition and scaffolding around a stubby-nosed A-20 Havoc with its side panels removed. The nose gunner's seat had been stripped. In its place, a twin .30 cal mount, fed by two Garvey drums suspended on swing arms rigged to pivot mid-flight. Lieutenant Ava Ross crouched near the cockpit, tightening a feed collar with a torque wrench. She wore her flight jacket half-zipped and a cigarette behind one ear. Her eyes flicked up when she saw Eli enter, the original Mark I drum slung across his back. You sure this won't shake itself loose mid-flight? She asked. Eli dropped the drum on the workbench with a heavy thunk. Only if your pilot yanks the nose like a barn door in a hurricane. Lucky for you, I'm the pilot. He smirked, brushing dust off the blueprint he'd laid out. You fly with that cigarette too. She pulled it out and lit it. Helps me think. Eli pointed to the modified spool brace on the schematic. This version's got a gyro-mounted tensioner. Took the concept from a washing machine clutch in a GI laundry tent outside Reims. You repurposed a laundry machine for an aircraft weapon. He nodded. She's got load sensors now, compensates for yaw and barrel climb. Ava studied him a moment. You don't look like much, Garvey, no offense. None taken, I'm not. She stepped toward the fuselage. But if this thing feeds clean for more than 30 seconds, I'll kiss you on the mouth. Eli didn't flinch. You kiss me, I'll put a third drum in the tail. Later that afternoon, the A-20 took off with a roar that rattled windows across the proving grounds. Inside the nose turret, Ava Ross was strapped in, goggles tight, gloved fingers on the twin spade grips. The twin .30s were loaded with training rounds. 2 Garve drums, each holding 1,750 rounds, were locked, primed, and humming faintly. They climbed to 3,000 feet. Ava keyed the intercom. Target range coming up, 10 seconds. Eli's voice crackled in her ear from the ground control shack. You've got permission to let her rip. Ava smiled. Roger that. She pushed the trigger, and the sky lit up. Yes, sir, replied the aide. She emptied both drums, ground accuracy within 12% deviation. Another general, older with rheumy eyes, leaned back in his chair. You said this design wasn't from ordnance. No, sir, field initiated, by a PFC named Garve, Infantry. A pause. You're telling me a damn foot soldier built something the best engineers in Aberdeen could? The aide swallowed. Yes, sir. The older general grunted. Good, get him promoted, and don't let a single brass suit claim they invented it. The War Production Board liaison, a man in a gray suit with icy hands, cleared his throat. There's an issue. All eyes turned. He pushed forward a dossier. Patent paperwork was filed last week under the name of one Thomas Reddick, civilian, claims conceptual authorship of the rapid feed principle, technically filed before Garve's blueprint submission was logged. One general growled, You're saying someone stole it. Or preemptively took credit, sir. Silence. Until the elder general spoke again. I want Reddick found, and I want Garve in front of a goddamn camera. August 14, Fort Belvoir Media Room. The set was a plain green backdrop, one folding chair, and a hand-crank 16mm camera aimed dead center. Eli sat stiffly, wearing a cleaned-up uniform someone had thrown at him that morning. He kept looking off-camera. This is dumb, he muttered. Nobody wants to see me talk. A lieutenant stepped in, holding a cue card. They want authenticity. You're not a hero, that's why it works. Just say what's written. Eli stared at the cue card, then stood up, walked over to the camera, and tore it in half. I'll say it my way. The film rolled, and he looked directly into the lens. My name, S. Eli Garve. I was a private when I built the first drum. People told me it wouldn't work, that it was pointless, that the Army didn't need another machine gun feeding system. He held up the original prototype, scarred, blackened, patched with welded seams. This ran for 2,000 rounds on Omaha Beach. Didn't jam, didn't skip, kept firing when everything else failed. Men lived because of it, and I didn't build it in a lab. I built it because I was tired of watching my friends die while I cleared feed jams. He stared a second longer. You can put someone else's name on a form, but you can't make them build this. Only I did that. Good. The officer behind the camera whispered, son of a bitch. 2 days later, that footage was rushed to Signal Corps media teams. They pressed the reels into newsreels, propaganda films, radio broadcasts. The drum that won the hill. Field inventor, STUNS Ordnance. Private's garage-built design, SAVES-DOZENS. For the first time, the Army didn't bury a grunt's invention. They elevated it. And soon, troops across Europe were begging for a Garve drum. Production ramped, aircraft mount variants, ground tripod kits, even a belt-fed prototype for modified M3 grease guns, though it never left testing. Garve's name traveled faster than his invention. But Reddick didn't vanish. August 21, Chicago, Illinois Private Suite, Union League Club. Thomas Reddick stood near a window overlooking LaSalle Street, sipping brandy. A man stepped in, middle-aged, wearing a Navy intelligence pin. "You lost the patent claim." Reddick didn't turn. It was worth a try. The man closed the door. "They're not going to let you near military designs again." Reddick set down his glass. "Then maybe I'll design for someone else." "Germany's losing." "Maybe I'm thinking longer term." The man stepped forward. "You need to understand something." He handed Reddick a photograph. It was a still frame from Eli's newsreel. Him holding the drum like a wounded comrade. "He's a soldier, but he's not a fool." Reddick's eyes narrowed. "Are you threatening me?" "No," the man said, turning toward the door. "I'm telling you not to make the same mistake twice." Back at Aberdeen, Eli walked the floor of the manufacturing bay. Rows of finished drums, new versions, polished and gleaming, lined the walls. He picked one up, examined the linkage, smiled. "Version 6, a tech said proudly. 2 pounds lighter, faster armature." Eli nodded. But something in his expression was distant. Ava Ross noticed. She leaned on a nearby tool chest, arms folded. "You did it, it's real, it's saving lives." "I know. You don't look happy." He exhaled. "Every time I pull that trigger I think about Manny, about why I built it in the first place. Feels wrong to celebrate." She stepped closer. "But you're here, he's not. And if he were, he'd tell you to keep pulling that trigger, harder." Eli nodded slowly. Outside, an army jeep rumbled to a stop. A courier stepped out, carrying a sealed envelope. "For Garvey," he said. Eli opened it. Inside, orders. Deployment immediate. Destination, the Ardennes. Ava looked at him. "They want you back in Europe." He folded the letter, eyes steeled. "They want the drum where the line S about to break." Ava swallowed. "You'll go." He strapped the Mark III drum to his back. It was never supposed to stay here. July 1945, stateside. Eli Garvey stood alone in a warehouse outside Detroit, watching a row of new Garvey drums being boxed for storage. The war was ending. There would be no need for drums like these soon. No need for 2,000-round belts. No need for field-welded gears. No need for a grunt with burned hands and stubborn hope. But even now, engineers were drawing up peacetime variants. For air support. For convoy escorts. For what came next. A young Army reporter stepped up, holding a notepad. "Mr. Garvey." "Yeah." "We're running a story on field innovations. Can I ask, how did you know it would work?" Eli looked at the drum. Ran his fingers along the dented seam, still there from that morning on Omaha Beach. He didn't smile. Didn't brag. He just said, "Because it had to."